What if the moment you failed most completely was the moment God moved closest to you, not away? What are you still carrying from a time when you tried your best and it still was not enough? And somewhere, quietly, you decided that meant something was wrong with you. If you knew, truly knew, that every shattered effort of yours had already been gathered up by hands that love you, would you finally be able to put it down? There is a harvest happening in your life right now, and you are almost, certainly looking for it in the wrong field. You have been watching your successes, your accomplishments, the moments when things finally came together, waiting for God to show up in those bright, presentable places, and He has not been there, or at least not in the way you expected, not with the weight you hoped for. But there is another field, a darker one, the one behind your house that you try not to look at. The field of your failures, your reversals, your abandoned prayers, your repeated sins, your collapsed plans, your exhausted good intentions. The field you have been quietly ashamed of for years. And that is the field where He has been working all along. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux understood this with a precision that took her years to arrive at and a courage that cost her everything. She was not a woman who succeeded, not in the ways the world measures success, and not even in the ways she herself wanted to succeed. She tried to enter Carmel and was refused. She tried to love without limit and found herself empty. She tried to pray and found silence. She tried to be holy and found only her own smallness staring back at her. And then something shifted, not in her circumstances, but in her understanding of what God was actually doing with all of it. He was not waiting for her victories. He was harvesting her failures. Subscribe. Because the thing you are most ashamed of may be the very thing God has been tending all along, and you deserve to understand why. You know the feeling of looking back, not the gentle, grateful kind of looking back, the kind you do at the end of a good day when everything went the way it was supposed to. No, the other kind. The looking back you do at 2 a.m., twice when the room is too quiet, and the inventory of your failures lines itself up without your permission. The thing you said that cost you a friendship, the resolution you made and broke before noon, the person you promised to be, to God, to yourself, to someone who trusted you, and quietly became something smaller than instead. The prayer you stopped praying because it felt dishonest, the confession you keep postponing because you have confessed this same thing too many times already. That kind of looking back. And in those moments almost every soul does the same thing. You assume, and without even fully realizing you are assuming it, that God's relationship to your failures is something like disappointment, that He is waiting, patiently or impatiently, for you to finally move past this, to finally get it right, to finally give Him something worth working with, that the failures are the obstacle between you and grace, not the very place where grace has decided to operate. Thérèse of Lisieux spent years under this same assumption. She was a child of extraordinary intensity, deep feeling, deep longing, deep need. She wept constantly as a small child. She was plagued by scrupulosity so severe it distorted her relationship with God into something tight and anxious. She wanted to be a saint, with a ferocity that she herself recognized as dangerous. "I felt within me," she wrote, "a burning desire to give myself, to love God with a love that would be unbounded." But the wanting itself became a trap, because what she wanted was a version of holiness she had constructed, a holiness that looked like unbroken victory, and it was not given to her. What was given to her instead was failure, not catastrophic failure, not dramatic, visible failure that would at least carry some dignity. Small failure, repeated failure, the failure of a novice who could not stay awake during prayer, the failure of a young religious who felt nothing during Mass, the failure of a daughter who could not stop worrying about her dying father, the failure of a soul who wanted to love and found herself again and again confronting the hard floor of her own limitations. There is a particular texture to small, repeated failure. It does not feel instructive, it does not feel purifying. It feels, if you are being honest, like evidence, evidence of something defective, evidence that you are not what you hoped you were, evidence that the spiritual life, for all your trying, is not producing in you what it seems to produce in others. This is the field Thérèse found herself standing in, not the field of dramatic suffering. She would enter that later, in the dark night that consumed her final years. This was the ordinary field, the one filled with the small common wreckage of daily spiritual life, and she began to look at it differently. Not because she forced herself to, not because a spiritual director told her to reframe her failures as opportunities, but because she began, slowly, to notice something in the Gospels that she had been reading past for years. She noticed that Jesus did not go to the people who had something to offer him. He went to the people who were empty. He did not harvest the religious leaders who had maintained their records of observance. He sat down with the woman at the well. He called to Zacchaeus in the tree. He stopped for the blind man shouting by the road. He touched the leper. He did not wait for them to clean up. He arrived precisely in their uncleaned state. Something in Therese began to shift. "What pleases him," she wrote, "is not what we achieve, but what we let him achieve in us. And what he wants to achieve," she was beginning to understand, "does not require cleared ground. It requires surrendered ground." Not the same thing. The field you have been avoiding, the one behind your house, the one overgrown with your failures, has not been abandoned. It has been visited, tended, and marked. Not for demolition, for harvest. You cannot see yet what is growing there. That is all right. You do not have to see it to let it be tended. What Therese understood, and what she will spend this entire video helping you understand, is that God's relationship to failure is not remediation. It is not a program for fixing the broken thing until it becomes useful. It is something stranger, deeper, and far more intimate than that. It is a relationship that begins at the point of failure, not after it is resolved. That is not a consolation. That is a theological claim, one with roots, one with a name. The field you have been looking away from is the field he chose first. Your failures are not the proof that he has not come. They may be the very address where he lives. There is a line in Therese's autobiography, a line so small it is easy to read past, that contains the entire architecture of her spirituality. She writes, "I am too little to climb the rough stairway of perfection." Read it again. Not, "I am too weak, and I am working on that." Not, "I struggle with perfection, but I press forward." Not even, "God helps me climb in spite of my weakness." She says she is too little to climb at all. This is not humility performance. This is not the practiced self-deprecation of a saint who knows she is supposed to sound humble. This is a woman who looked directly at the spiritual tradition she inherited, a tradition that presented holiness as an ascent, a stairway, a progressive stripping away of imperfection until the purified soul could finally present itself before God, and said, quietly, from the very bottom of the stairway, "I will not reach the top this way, and I no longer believe that is the way." To understand what that cost her, you have to understand what it means to abandon the model of ascent. Most people who take the spiritual life seriously carry, somewhere in the architecture of their souls, a version of the stairway. It may not be explicitly articulated, it may not even be consciously held, but it operates. It is the quiet belief that God's closeness is something you move toward, that there is a direction called toward God, and it is up, and it involves leaving failure behind, growing past it. The failures are the lower rungs, the victories are higher. The goal is to keep climbing until the lower rungs are no longer visible. This model has a coherent inner logic, and it is catastrophically wrong, not because the spiritual life does not involve growth, but because it positions failure as the thing you must overcome in order to receive love, rather than the place where love is already operating. Therese saw this, and she paid for the seeing of it. Because abandoning the stairway does not feel like freedom, not at first. It feels like giving up. It feels in a specific and humiliating way like admitting defeat. Every soul that has been formed by the ascent model, and that is most souls who take holiness seriously, feels the surrender of the stairway as loss, as lowering, as a spiritual failure on top of all the other failures. She felt it. She wrote about the particular agony of watching other sisters in Carmel seem to advance, to grow, to deepen, while she remained at the bottom, still the same small thing she had always been, still crying unexpectedly, still falling asleep in prayer, still dry in the Eucharist, she had longed for her whole childhood, still small, still ordinary, still exactly as she had been. The stairway had produced in her a very precise kind of suffering, not the suffering of effort and failure, that is at least dignified, the suffering of watching effort and failure repeat long enough to realize the model itself is broken. And then she found the elevator. This is her language, not mine. She writes, in one of the most remarkable passages in all her work, "I wanted to find an elevator which would raise me to Jesus, for I am too little to climb the rough stairway of perfection." I searched then in the scriptures for some sign of this elevator, the object of my desire, and I read these words coming from the mouth of eternal wisdom, "Whosoever is a little one, let him come to me." And so I succeeded. I felt I had found what I was looking for. The elevator is not an alternative route to the same destination, a faster or easier version of the ascent. The elevator is a completely different theological understanding of what holiness is and how God works. The ascent says, remove your failures and present your victories. The elevator says, bring your failures, all of them, and let yourself be lifted from them. The ascent says God is at the top. The elevator says God is already here, at the bottom, and He will do the lifting. The difference is not small, the difference is everything. What does this mean in the life you are actually living? Not the life you are supposed to be living, but this one, the one with its specific weight of accumulated failure. It means the question is not, how do I stop failing? The question is, am I willing to be lifted from here? And the word here must mean the actual here, not the cleaned-up version of here, not the here you will present once you have made some progress, but the exact location of your life as it currently stands, with every failure included. Therese is not asking you to be comfortable with failure. She is not asking you to stop caring about virtue. She is asking something far more demanding. She is asking you to let God meet you in the failure itself, not after it. That requires a particular kind of courage that does not look like courage. It looks like sitting still. It looks like not running past the failure toward improvement. It looks like staying in the field long enough for someone to find you there. Most people never do this. Most people keep climbing. They exhaust themselves on the stairway and call the exhaustion holiness. Therese sat down. What would it mean for you, this week, this day, to sit down instead of climb? Not in defeat, in trust, in the specific, difficult, beautiful act of waiting to be lifted rather than pulling yourself up. This is where she waited. This is where he came. There is a particular kind of failure that does not come from laziness or inattention. It comes from giving everything you have and watching it produce nothing. This is the failure Therese spent the last 18 months of her life inside, not the small domestic failures of ordinary religious life, the falling asleep, the dryness, the repeated imperfections, something larger and more terrible, something she called, in the final section of her autobiography, a tunnel. She had been raised in a faith that was bright and consoling, a faith where heaven was palpable, where the presence of God was something she could feel in her chest, where the promise of eternal life was not an abstraction, but a warmth. And then, in April of 1896, that warmth disappeared. Not dimmed, disappeared. She writes, "He permitted my soul to be invaded by the thickest darkness, and that the thought of heaven, up until then so sweet to me, be no longer anything but the cause of struggle and torment." This is not spiritual dryness. This is not a difficult season. This is the ground of her faith becoming, in her own experience, indistinguishable from no faith at all. The consolations gone. The sense of God's nearness gone. The certainty she had built her life around, the certainty of heaven, of meaning, of divine love beneath everything, now experienced as absence. And she kept going. She kept praying the prayers. She kept her vows. She kept serving the novices in her care. She kept writing her autobiography, even as her body failed and her lungs filled, and the darkness in her soul refused to lift. This is the point at which most accounts of Therese lose their nerve and begin to explain too quickly, to say that this suffering was redemptive, that God was working through it, that she was being purified. All of that is true, but it rushes past the actual experience too fast and in doing so it removes the specific consolation her darkness is meant to offer you. Because the consolation is not that suffering has meaning. You already know suffering has meaning. That knowledge has not made your suffering easier to carry. The consolation is this: she could not feel the harvest happening. She went through the entire dark night without seeing, without feeling, without experiencing any confirmation that God was present or active or tending anything at all. She stayed in the field in pure darkness, and the harvest happened anyway. This is the part that matters. What God was doing in Therese during those 18 months was not invisible because it was not happening. It was invisible because that is how this particular work is done. Not every harvest is a visible one. Some of the deepest, most consequential work that God does in a soul happens in conditions that feel from the inside like total spiritual failure. The silence that feels like abandonment, the dryness that feels like death, the effort that produces no perceivable fruit. She wrote from inside this with her characteristic precision, "I do not have the joy of faith. I try to do works of faith." That sentence is worth sitting with. She is not saying, "I am persevering despite doubt." She is saying her experience has become indistinguishable from the experience of someone who does not believe, and she is continuing to act from faith anyway. Not because she can feel the ground beneath her, because she has chosen to act as though it is there. This is not the faith of spiritual childhood as a warm, consoled thing. This is the full cost of it. Spiritual childhood without the consolations, trust without the felt presence of the one you are trusting, love directed into what feels, in your own experience, like a void. Think about the specific failure you are carrying that is most like this. Not the failure of sin or laziness. Those have their own texture. The failure of effort without return. The prayer that was sincere and apparently unheard. The faithfulness that produced no visible fruit. The years you gave to something or someone in good faith and nothing opened. The hope you held for a specific person, a specific healing, a specific turning, and it did not come. From the inside of that experience, it is almost impossible to believe that anything is being harvested. Failure of that order does not feel like a dark field being tended. It feels like a field that has simply been forgotten. What Therese tells you, not with words arranged to comfort you, but with the testimony of her own 18-month dark night, is that the feeling is not the evidence. The field that felt forgotten was not forgotten. The work that felt suspended was not suspended. The love that felt absent was not absent. She could not prove this from inside the tunnel. She could only choose it. Again and again across 18 months, in the face of nothing that confirmed the choice, she chose it. What you cannot feel right now is not proof of what is not happening. It is proof of what kind of faith is being grown in you, the faith that does not require the consolation to continue. The faith that belongs not to the season of light, but to the season of harvest, which is, in the life of the soul, almost always a season of darkness. He is working in your field right now, even in this, especially in this. Toward the end of her life, when her body was failing and her faith was being tested by the tunnel she had lived in for so long, Therese said something to her sister Céline that has stayed in the hearts of those who love her ever since. She said, "Everything is grace." It is easy to hear this as resignation, as the kind of thing someone says when they are too tired to argue with what has happened to them, as spiritual defeat dressed in the language of acceptance. But that is not what it is. Everything is grace is a theological statement. It is a claim about the structure of reality, specifically the reality of how God operates in a life that has been surrendered to Him. It is Therese's final and most distilled conclusion about the relationship between failure and grace, based not on consoled feeling, but on 18 months of tested, stripped, repeatedly chosen faith. Everything, not some things once you understand them, not even the hard things in retrospect, everything, including what is happening right now, including what is not yet resolved, including what looks from the outside and from the inside like loss. Let me tell you what this looks like in practical terms, because Therese was not a woman who trafficked in abstraction. There is a moment she records in her autobiography of failing, publicly in a small way, in front of her novices, at something she had tried repeatedly to do well. She had worked on her patience. She had prayed about her impatience. She had watched herself lose patience in the same circumstances again and again, and in that moment she lost it again. She felt the familiar heat of shame and defeat, and then, instead of immediately performing contrition, she stopped. She sat with what had happened. She brought it, failure and all, to Jesus without dressing it up. She writes that she told him, "My God, I am too little and wretched to climb toward you. I ask you to take me just as I am. Not, I will do better. Not, forgive me, I will work harder on this. But here I am, just as I am, in the failure, and I am asking you to take me from here." This is not indifference to growth. Therese worked intensely on her interior life. She was not passive about holiness, but she had learned, at great cost, the difference between offering God her effort and offering God her actual self. Effort offered to God is valuable, but it is not the same as self. When you offer God your efforts, you are giving him the cleaned-up version of your will. When you offer God your actual self, including the failures, the repeated failures, the failures you are most ashamed of, you are giving him something that effort alone cannot offer, the whole of what you are, not just the parts that have been improved. This is what he is harvesting. Not your achievements, not the beautiful parts of your prayer life, not the seasons when you felt close to him and everything seemed possible. He is harvesting your actual self. And your actual self includes, perhaps is most fully revealed in your failures. Think about what you have given up on, not the things you abandoned carelessly. Those have their own accounting. The things you gave up on because you tried, because you brought your full weight to bear on something and it did not hold. The relationship you fought for. The habit of prayer you built and lost and built again and lost again. The person you tried to become in some specific and important way and could not. The good you reached for repeatedly and did not take hold of. You likely carry those not as neutral memories, but as evidence. Evidence that you are not quite what you hoped. Evidence that something in your soul lacks the depth or the strength or the will to finally hold. Therese would sit with you in front of that evidence, not to dispute it, but to reframe what it is evidence of. It is not evidence of spiritual deficiency. It is evidence of spiritual honesty. You tried, you failed. You brought the failure, perhaps not with grace, perhaps with shame and confusion, but you brought it. You are still here, still watching, still carrying the question of what God does with this. He harvests it. He takes the abandoned field and finds in it exactly what he was looking for. A soul that has been emptied enough to be filled, that has tried hard enough to know it cannot do this on its own, that has carried its failures long enough to finally hold them out, instead of hiding them. "I know of no other means to reach perfection," she wrote, "than love. Let us love, since our heart is made for nothing else. Not, let us succeed. Not, let us finally overcome our failures. Let us love. And the love she means is not the love that has arrived at peace with itself. It is the love that is still in process. The love that includes the failures. The love that hands over even the most shameful field and says, 'Do with this what you will.' This is the harvest he has been waiting for, not your victories, your surrender, not your strength, your smallness, not the field you managed and maintained, the field you gave up on and finally, in this moment, handed over. He was always going to harvest this field. He has been here the whole time. And you, and with everything you are carrying right now, with every failure included, are not behind. You are not less than. You are not a project still waiting to begin. You are right now the exact thing he came for. You stayed until the end. That means something. Not everyone does. Most people leave when the subject gets too close to something real they are carrying. And this one was close, I know. You stayed anyway. And I want to say something to you directly before we close. If what you heard today reached something in you, the field behind your house, the harvest you could not see, the failure you have been carrying as evidence against yourself, then I want you to know there is more. Not more information, more accompaniment. Every single morning, before the world makes its first demand of you, I record a prayer. An exclusive morning prayer written for members of this community. not a generic prayer. A prayer that goes to where you actually are. The tired places, the ashamed places, the places that feel too small for God to notice. It is written for the soul that woke up this morning already carrying something. The soul that needs to begin the day not with a strategy, but with a covering. Each morning prayer carries the intercession of Therese, the little one who understood what it means to be small before God, who lived the dark tunnel and came out on the other side saying, "Everything is grace." Her intercession is not distant. It is specific, personal, and real. She prays for the souls who take the little way seriously. She prays for you. The prayer covers you before you step out. It asks God to be present in the failures that are coming today, not just the victories. It asks Him to harvest what you cannot see. It asks the Holy Spirit to move in the fields you have given up on. It takes 4 minutes. It changes the entire day. If you want to begin your mornings covered, prayed over, accompanied, received by a community that is taking the spiritual life as seriously as you are, then join us. Come and be part of what Therese called her shower of roses, the graces she promised to continue sending from heaven to the souls who asked. You do not need to arrive with victories. You just need to arrive. Come and be covered too.